They've been convicted of terrible crimes.
I don't know, I just kept trying to tell myself, maybe he wasn't dead.
And are among the more than 150 women sentenced to death in the United States.
When the verdict came down and they said guilty, all I wanted to do was just collapse and cry.
In compelling interviews, these women reveal what it's like to face execution.
You don't know what tomorrow holds. That just hits you even harder, you know? You think, oh my God, they're executing people and these people ain't even had a chance or nothing.
And deal with the consequences of their deeds.
Well, I told my attorney, they can kill me then, right then and there. Bring the mama in, let her shoot me. And I meant that.
I've never wanted to die.
I lost everything I ever cared about. Everything.
Almost like every day is your last.
I want to stay alive for me. Because if I'm going to die in here, I'm going to die for my truth.
It was a cold, calculated plot from the get-go to kill this man, and it was done solely for the gain of Donna Cox.
No, I never fell out of love with Jerry.
I felt like she was a victim of circumstances, that she had been involved in this because she had associated with the wrong people.
In October 1987, 28-year-old Donna Cox was sentenced to death in North Carolina for the brutal murder of her boyfriend, Jerry Richardson. After more than 2 decades behind bars, Donna still maintains that she did not kill the man she says she loved.
I don't know, I just kept trying to tell myself, you know, maybe it just wasn't so, maybe it wasn't him, you know, maybe he wasn't dead.
This was Donna's reaction when the police found Richardson's body floating in the Cape Fear River in North Carolina on the 13th of July, 1986. For the first time since her imprisonment, Donna is telling her story.
I did this interview because I was hoping that, you know, maybe it could help somebody. You know, with the younger kids and stuff, that drugs is not the way, okay? And just never, you know, get involved with a married man, you know, because, you know, look what happened.
Donna had a fairly happy, normal childhood in suburban Atlanta.
A very sweet child. She sang, she danced, and she could do all the latest dance steps and so many songs that she knew by heart.
But her parents' relationship was troubled.
With both of my parents, neither one of them hardly ever talked much. You know, they wouldn't talk. You never heard "I love you," and you know, I mean, I miss that.
Donna's mother, Bonnie, remarried twice and went on to have 3 more children.
It may have made her feel like I didn't care as much as I had before. I can see that. But she was special to me.
By the time she reached high school, Donna was looking for a way out. At 16, she attempted suicide by overdosing on non-prescription painkillers. Not long afterwards, she began seeing a man named Joe.
I quit high school in the 10th grade. I eloped and got married. I mean, I didn't even love the man. I just wanted to get away and just be on my own, is really why I did it.
At age 19, Donna gave birth to a daughter, Susie, but she'd married the wrong man.
He would pull her hair out, I mean, in big pieces. And he just whipped her like a man.
Donna eventually left Joe and moved on to another dysfunctional relationship.
Scott introduced me to cocaine, Quaaludes, I about killed myself in that year, and that's why I had to get away from him.
At age 22, Donna decided to make a fresh start. She moved to the quiet rural area of Robeson County, North Carolina. It was here she met Jerry Richardson, a well-known used car dealer.
I just asked him, I said, I really need a job, and, is there anything, that I could do?
People trusted him. People would come from all over this eastern part of the state to have him buy cars wholesale for them, make a few bucks on it. And so he had a lot of friends.
He worked real hard, taught me how to work hard, and he was always good to me. We had a good relationship.
The married father of two soon fell for Donna Cox.
He was a very attractive man, and he was real nice, he was sweet.
What she said to me was that they were in love, and that nobody had ever treated her with kindness and someone that truly cared about her.
Richardson showered Donna with generous gifts, including a wooden house in Parkton, North Carolina, and a white Lincoln car. He paid for her daughter's private education and took them on trips to the beach.
He made her feel special. He paid all of her bills. He bought all her clothes. He took her out to eat. He showed her a lifestyle that otherwise she would not have known.
But according to Donna, the comfortable lifestyle came at a price. She claims that when Richardson got drunk, he became abusive. It's an allegation his daughter denies.
He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. I never in my life have heard him say a curse word. Never.
We would get in fights, and he, would beat on me.
When she told me that she thought her ribs were broke, I told her, I said, get in your car right now and leave there.
And I loved him. I always went back.
Despite the alleged abuse, Donna spent 4 years living as Richardson's mistress. Court records state she fell pregnant, but lost the baby after 4 months. Donna was once again looking for an escape route.
Jerry would not allow her to go anywhere and do hardly anything. He wanted her to stay at home and tend to her daughter and be there at his beck and call.
Well, you've seen people walk around with the tattoo on their arm that says, born to raise hell. She needs one of those. She just can't stay out of trouble.
Enter James Willis, a local teenager who liked fast cars, drugs, and sex.
I believe that Donna was attracted to the wild side of James Willis. He gave her some type of a thrilling adventure because of his ways and his personality.
Each night after Richardson had left, Willis and his friends, Roy Grooms and Tony Owens, would throw wild parties at Donna's place.
I would smoke marijuana, and I was doing cocaine with them.
Donna's budding party scene was soon joined by Tracy Phillips. The 16-year-old had recently given birth to Donna's brother's child.
She was having a hard time with the baby and everything, and I said, well, why don't you come up for a couple weeks,
But there was no rest for the young mother.
Those boys were there every night. It was just one big party fest. She cut out 4 lines of cocaine and told me that was for me. So I sat there, what am I gonna do? There's peer pressure,
Later on, Mr. Richardson told Donna that Tracy had to go because she was the reason the guys were hanging around the house here all the time.
Donna felt torn between her new friends and Jerry Richardson, who was her only source of income. Then the young James Willis made his move.
And he said, I love you. And I was like, how can you love me? And he was like, well, how do you look at me? I said, well, I look at you like a friend. He said, a friend? You think I've been coming over all this time, bringing cocaine, doing cocaine with you because I was your friend? He said, I've been in love with you for a long time. We wound up being together intimately. And it just happened, it's the biggest mistake.
When Women on Death Row continues.
Donna said that she would get him drunk. When he got back from the house, she'd give him the best sex he had ever had. And they could beat him in the driveway.
A vicious murder and Donna's denial.
I said, what do you mean he's dead? She said, I said, who's dead? She said, Jerry's dead.
And an interview with Chelsea Richardson.
I know I'm innocent. I'm convicted of something I didn't do.
Prosecutors say greed motivated her to kill.
When you see the crime scene pictures, it's very disconcerting because there are cute little Christmas tree and blood.
During the summer of 1986, 27-year-old Donna Cox was living life in the fast lane. Her married boyfriend, Jerry Richardson, was a successful used car salesman who gave her everything she needed. But for Donna, it wasn't enough.
The decisions that people make in life, you know, the people that you choose to be with can make the difference in your whole life. And she just chose to hang around the wrong people.
Donna's drug habit was in full swing. She'd also found a younger man, James Willis, and a new set of friends. But Richardson, who was still paying the bills, wanted them out of her life. On the weekend of the 4th of July, Donna, James Willis, Tracy Phillips, and several others stayed at the Docksider Motel in Curry, North Carolina. There, Tracy Phillips says she overheard a conversation between Donna Cox and her lover, James Willis. They were planning to take Jerry Richardson's money and end his life.
Donna said that she would get him drunk. When he got back from the house, she'd give him the best sex he had ever had. And they could beat him in the driveway.
I wasn't having a discussion. They were having a discussion. Obviously, this was going on the whole time behind my back, and I didn't have any knowledge of it.
So they decided they would wait until the following Wednesday or Thursday. Now, why Wednesday and Thursday was significant, that is when Richardson would go to the car sales, and that's when he would have large amounts of money on his person.
The police say Cox and her friends left the motel and returned to her home in Parkton, North Carolina. James Willis, Tony Owens, and Roy Grooms armed themselves with lead pipes and waited for Richardson to arrive.
Mr. Richardson pulled his car up to the gate here, got out, opened the gate, pulled his car through, and then got back out of his car to close the gate. Tony Owens was concealed in this ditch here. He got up, distracted Jerry Richardson, and James Willis, who was hiding in the hedgerow here, which at the time of the murder formed a canopy over this gate. He got out with a crowbar he had and ran up to Jerry Richardson and began to strike Jerry Richardson. Jerry Richardson yelled out for Donna Cox at the time and asked Donna to get him help. Donna then said, "Don't do it, don't do it." Willis continued to beat Jerry Richardson, ultimately beating him down to the ground. Donna went back inside the house, and Jerry Richardson was killed right here at this spot.
Tracy Phillips was waiting in a car at a nearby petrol station. She claimed she didn't know what had happened until Tony Owens took her back to Donna's house.
He said, he did it. He fucking did it. He bashed the motherfucker's brains out. He fucking did it. He did it. He did it. That's all he keeps screaming. As I go in the house, Donna goes, "They did it. They did it." I stood here and watched them do it. Jerry yelled for me to help him, and I turned around and walked back in the house. She hands me an empty dog food bag and a flashlight and tells me to go out there and find what I can. And when I came back in the house, I had blood all over my feet because I had on flip-flops and all over my hands. And I told her I found some of his rings and I found his glasses. And that's all I can find.
Donna tells a different story.
Well, first of all, Tracy come running in the house. She said, "Donna, he's dead." I said, "What do you mean he's dead?" I said, "Who's dead?" She said, "Jerry's dead."
They came to this bridge, and they stopped on the bridge about midway and removed Richardson's body from the trunk and threw it over the side of the bridge on the downstream side. Willis told Donna that he had taken care of it. He had killed Jerry Richardson, and Donna became angry. She said, "I told you not to do it because he didn't have the money on him. I told you not to do it. Now we have nothing." Then they discussed taking Richardson's jewelry and pawning the jewelry and splitting the money.
The money totaled just $526, not the thousands the police believed they'd expected. The following day, fishermen found Jerry Richardson's body floating in the Cape Fear River.
The body only had socks, had his shorts, and I believe a t-shirt. The rest of his clothes had been removed. At the time of the murder, the vegetation here at the time formed a canopy over this driveway and gate. When we conducted a luminol test for blood here at the crime scene, there was blood splatters as high as 15 feet up on the foliage, which indicates the severity of the beating that Mr. Richardson sustained right here at this spot.
The police never found the murder weapon or Richardson's bloody clothing. But after an extensive search, they recovered other evidence, including Donna's bloody flip-flops, as well as drug paraphernalia, and bottles of bleach used to clean up the blood. They also found a dog food bag. While the police investigated Richardson's murder, Donna and her friends headed back to Curry Beach.
So they stayed there for a few days. They partied, they did drugs, they did LSD, they did cocaine, they drank liquor.
The police picked up a drunk James Willis when he drove Jerry Richardson's car into a ditch.
A trooper responded, found Mr. Richardson's car, and of course at that time realized that the car was entered as stolen and connected to a missing person and a possible homicide.
The police found Richardson's wallet in the car and held Willis for questioning. Chief Philip Little was the first officer to interview him in jail.
James Willis then gave me a statement that started the focus of the investigation towards Tony Owens, Roy Grooms, and Donna Cox.
James Willis and Donna Cox were charged with the first-degree murder of Jerry Richardson. District Attorney Joe Freeman Britt prosecuted the trial. He's been listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the prosecutor who's put the most criminals on death row.
He wanted her to get the death penalty. He had to put her in there as being the one who planned the thing and had it carried out.
Young lawyer Frida Black was one of Donna's attorneys. It was only her second death penalty case.
Our defense was, why kill the goose that lays the golden egg? And Donna, during the trial, adamantly denied having anything to do with killing Jerry because of that very reason.
Behind the scenes, Britt built his case on confessions from Tracy Phillips and Roy Grooms, but his main witness was Tony Owens.
Well, when you try the devil, you have to go to hell to find your witnesses. They certainly weren't saints, but their degree of guilt was less than the other two.
After a 6-week trial at the Robeson County Courthouse in Lumberton, North Carolina, a jury of 7 women and 5 men found James Willis and Donna Cox guilty and sentenced them to death.
I put my arms around her and sat there beside her, and she had her arms around me, and she was just rocking, just like a little kid. Just rocking.
When Donna Cox was imprisoned in the autumn of 1987, she was the only female inmate on North Carolina's death row. Donna was transferred to the Southern Correctional Institution for Women in Troy, North Carolina, a medium security prison.
There's a table and a little bench to sit on. And then we have like these 2 tracks on the wall that we can put our pictures up in. So I have all my family and, you know, up. And at the foot of the bed, I have my clothes hanging there. That's about it.
These days, Donna spends her time crocheting items for her granddaughter, Savannah, whom she hopes to see one day as a free woman.
I hope I have a future. I hope that I can get out and be reunited with my family. And I can be a part of my daughter's life and my granddaughter's life.
I feel like she took a lot from us that we can never get back. She took, well, it's been 20 plus years of time that we could have spent with him, and he never got to meet his grandchildren. Just a lot of things, you know, just time that she has. She can talk to people, she can talk to relatives, you know, she's still here and he's not.
I'm sorry that my family has had to go through what they've had to go through, that my daughter has had to go through what she did, that Jerry's family have had to go through what they have. I just hope that someday that they can forgive me, because I've had to live with this every day, you know, for 20 years, and I'll have to live with it for the rest of my life. And I am sorry. I didn't want him to die.
Oklahoma City, 1979. A boom time for this mid-American metropolis. While people in other parts of the United States were feeling the effects of a severe recession, many in this town were striking it rich.
There was a lot of oil, there was a lot of money, there was a lot of greed, there were a lot of individuals coming here from other states to take part in legitimate and illegitimate businesses both, and as a result the crime rate really went up, and the Benzes were part of that. They got caught up in this greed and easy money attitude, I think.
32-year-old Michelle Benz had arrived in Oklahoma City 5 years before. She was a single mother and exotic dancer. She was eventually joined by her on-again, off-again partner, Stephen Benz. Before long, the two were swept up in a complex murder-for-hire scheme.
She was just a kid, and Stephen was just a kid. I mean, they were poor people, kind of lost. I think became embroiled and wrapped up in something that was way beyond their kin.
If there were ever 2 individuals that deserved to be executed, it was this 2, at least in Oklahoma.
The story of Michelle Benz and her journey to death row began as a love story.
I grew up in Michigan City, Indiana. I never knew I was adopted until grade school, and then I felt privileged because I was picked.
When Michelle, whose friends called her Mickey, was just 15, she fell for a teenage rebel with a passion for speed.
We used to drag race down the main street. He was the main group, and everybody followed him.
The innocent teenager was soon head over heels in love.
She was a fine young lady back then. I mean, I guess what attracted her is because we both liked to dance. And I caught her dancing with some of her girlfriends. We just got hooked up. I had a motorcycle then. She got on the back of the motorcycle and away we went.
At 19, Steve already had a reputation as a violent troublemaker.
I always played the big shot, trying to make people scared of me. I'd whoop their tail ends. I'd be in fights constantly, you know. I was always the thug, you know.
But the pair seemed to have an unbreakable bond. Like Michelle, Steve had also been adopted by a Michigan City family.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois. My real birth mother was back in 1943. And at that time, a young Jewish girl being pregnant, she couldn't keep me, so she put me up for adoption.
Steve soon asked Michelle to marry him.
Well, her mother got in contact with my adopted people and said, no, you ain't gonna marry her. Then they came up with a story that we were supposed to be brother and sister.
They said we couldn't be married because we were related.
That was just a story that they was trying to tell us because she knew I wasn't gonna be no good for her daughter. I was hot and mad. I started cussing everybody out and everything else, and I left the house. And I was gone for 2 years.
Age 19, Michelle married another man and moved to Florida. But she couldn't resist the bad boy who kept reappearing in her life.
I saw her at a drive-in restaurant, and I hollered at her. She hollered at me. We sat and talked for, a good hour and a half. 3 days later, we was back together again. I kind of left the woman I was married to and told her, she can kiss off, and I'm gone.
But not even the birth of Stephen, Michelle's first and only child, nor a fresh start in Kansas in the early 70s, could stop the long-haul trucker from leaving again and again.
Well, I was basically a single parent because Steve decided he wanted to go his way and go to find some other younger girls.
We broke up a lot because of me. My attitude, my temper, my craziness, I never really wanted to settle down. I wanted to settle down with her, I wanted to be with her, but I still wanted my candy too.
By the mid-1970s, Steve had developed a serious drug habit.
I've done acid and chocolate meth. I was a big crankster. I loved to crank. Loved to drop the pills and drive from coast to coast. Used to do a lot of Black Beauties, West Coast turnarounds, all that kind of stuff.
Struggling financially, Michelle and her young son left Kansas for Oklahoma, where she worked as an exotic dancer.
Back then, it was $6 an hour dancing, plus tips was good money back in the 70s. When you weren't dancing, you'd serve your drinks to the customers.
Two of her regular customers were Mel Ferguson and Jim Pamper, who was also a long-distance truck driver. During one of his stints in Oklahoma City, Michelle introduced Steve to Mel and Jim.
After Mickey introduced me to them, all of a sudden they were good old friends of mine. Every time I went to Mel's house, there was the pills there, the booze was there, anything I wanted.
Jim Pamper even offered him a job as a co-driver. According to Steve, the men were buttering him up to do some dirty work.
They brought up the subject about a friend of theirs was needing some help.
Mel Ferguson worked for a man named Robert Keller, who was making a lot of money in Oklahoma's booming and sometimes corrupt oil industry.
Mr. Keller had a company called Kelco Oil Service Company, and they provided services to oil field rigs. And Mr. Keller apparently had a hot temper and frequently had disputes with his employees.
One of those employees was Robert Bush, a security guard, who also worked for the Oklahoma Department of Corrections as a maintenance man.
And there was this particular dispute between Mr. Bush and Mr. Keller involving a small amount of money, $2,000, which Mr. Bush claimed was owed to him by Mr. Keller for employment purposes, and he sued him.
The murky dispute also involved a potentially lucrative patent for processing oil. Keller had allegedly obtained the patent unlawfully.
There was supposedly a new lubricant that was developed, and a patent was stolen.
The state was saying that Keller had gotten hold of a process for creating a lubricant, and Bush was threatening to reveal an illegal source that would prevent Keller from getting a patent.
Defense lawyer Frank Kirk's theory is that Robert Keller was running a corrupt business, and Bush wanted a piece of the action.
I believe that some of the shenanigans that were being seen, that were going on in the oil patch, were found out by Robert Bush, and that's the reason he had to die. The Benzes, in fact, were told by Mel Ferguson that both Mel Ferguson and Mr. Keller were being blackmailed by Robert Bush.
Mr. Keller asked Ferguson to find someone to kill Bush.
He apparently searched around and made contact with Stephen and Michelle Benz.
When Women on Death Row continues, was it intimidation?
I'm trying to tell him, we're not trying to hurt you, we're just here to scare you.
Or a cold-blooded hit.
I believe they were just thugs and criminals.
And later,
the prosecution, I believe they referred to her as having the devil within her, as being a monster.
What led Latasha Pulliam to abuse and kill?
I faced death more than once by the hands of my mother and baby.
In 1979, 17 years after they'd met and fallen in love, Michelle Parsons and Steve Binns finally got married.
I said, let's get married. Heck, right. She goes, you serious? And I said, yeah, let's go. Get married.
We decided to get married and make everything legal so that in case anything happened, it would be legal.
Prosecutors say that in March the same year, the Binnses planned to murder 40-year-old Robert Bush in return for money.
We had a theory that they intended to make this a career of becoming hit people, and that they were willing to do this one really cheap.
I believe they were just thugs and criminals, and when they were offered money, that they apparently thought they didn't have anything to lose.
Bush was embroiled in a heated dispute over back pay with his short-tempered former boss, Robert Keller. There were also rumors of bent business dealings and blackmail. Rather than pay up, Keller wanted Bush dead. It was Keller's middleman, Mel Ferguson, who approached the Binnses and offered them money to carry out the hit. No one agrees on how much.
According to the police story, $1,500, which in those days would be like $5,000 today.
I think it was more in the thousands. I don't think it was huge money because Keller was an individual that was not very free with his money.
Altogether, it was $150,000.
Now see, our state snitch said we were paid $50.
The state snitch was Carla Jo Rapp, Michelle's friend and fellow stripper. She would later become a key witness for the prosecution.
Carla was 19 years of age, as I recall, and she was enticed into being involved in this particular crime by offer of money and a vehicle.
According to Michelle Binns, the plan was simply to frighten Robert Bush into handing over a briefcase containing proof that Keller was involved in unlawful business practices.
We were supposed to go over and scare him and tell him not to sit there and turn this state's evidence. And that's all I understood we were supposed to do.
But Carla Jo Rapp claimed that the Binnses intended to kill Robert Bush.
She had sat at a table with Carla Jo Rapp and marking the bullets. The purpose in doing that is so these bullets will spread out and cause more damage. That's not someone that doesn't know what they're doing and just going along for the ride.
On the night of the 18th of March, 1979, the three drove to Robert Bush's house in Carla Jo's late model Ford. They were armed with a rifle and a sawn-off shotgun. The women were wearing wigs. According to the police, the plan was for Michelle and Carla Jo to distract Bush while Steve went in for the kill.
They knocked on his door and said they were having car trouble and asked him to help them.
Mr. Bush came out. We acted like we had car trouble. It had broke down, like our battery had died.
He did go to the vehicle, and I guess they raised the hood, and he was tapping on the battery posts, I believe. They had intended to kill him then, but for whatever reason, they felt that they were being watched. They decided not to do it that night.
And so the next night is when they went back and tried the same ploy. Mrs. Bush went to the door and she saw these two women.
She said, wait a minute, this sounds fishy because we just had some people here last night with car trouble.
She sensed there was something wrong with this, and so she went to get her husband, and he told her to get in the bedroom and lock the door. And he goes to the door.
Well, Carl and me pushed our way into the house. We showed him the weapons and told him, you're not supposed to turn state's evidence and turn over your evidence. He threatened us then. He was hollering, get out of my house, get out of my house. I'm going to call the police.
They tried to get him out, he wouldn't come out. So I said, get your ass out of here. And that's when I took the gun and I fired up like this. I said, come on, let's go.
According to Steve Binns, they got into a fight.
And I kicked him in the kneecap, and he went down, and he was trying to back away from me again, and I kicked him on his other leg, and that's when he went down on his knees, and that's when he started screaming, "Oh my God," and that's when I left. I never shot him.
Both Steve and Michelle claim they heard a single shot as they fled the scene. But Detective Bill Lewis tells a very different story.
Once they got past him, that's when Stephen stepped around the corner with the rifle and shot him point blank with a high-powered rifle, so he didn't have much of a chance of survival, I don't believe.
Detectives found two key pieces of evidence, an 8mm shell casing and a pair of prescription glasses belonging to Michelle Binns. They also had one more lead.
Well, one neighbor saw Carla Rapp's car, and he was able to give us a description of the car. Another neighbor was able to get the tag number, and once we were able to locate her and felt that there was enough evidence to charge her as a material witness in the case, she decided that she wanted to tell her story. So that's how we learned about Stephen and Michelle Binns.
1 week later, Michelle Binns was arrested by Oklahoma City Police.
I kept saying, "We did not do it, we did not do it." And they said, "Well, you're under arrest for it."
But Steve Binns and his co-driver Jim Pampa had already left town in their big rig.
4 days after they picked up Mickey, I was driving a truck. I was already at Clovis, New Mexico when they arrested me.
The police found an 8mm rifle belonging to a man named Kenny Reed. Reed testified that he'd lent the weapon to Steve Binns shortly before the murder.
We connected the rifle with Mr. Reed, and the rifle ballistics showed that it was in fact the weapon that was used. They said that they went over there to scare him, but that's not really backed up by Mr. Reed. The only way that we know is the comment that Michelle made to Mr. Reed that there goes $1,500. And that was because they weren't able to accomplish the killing on the 18th.
Steve tried to take the full blame for this and say, you know, that he was the one that did it and that I was just an innocent bystander and that I had nothing to do with this. But the DAs would not separate our case.
It was proven that she was aware that it was murder for money. It was proven that she was an active participant by setting him up, making 2 attempts to do that. She was just as culpable as the person that actually pulled the trigger.
My mind of thinking they ain't gonna do it. They're not gonna kill us, you know. That's just them talking.
When the verdict came down and they said guilty, all I wanted to do was just collapse and cry.
I said, what went down in this trial is bullshit. That's what I exactly told her. I said, just hang on, keep your mouth shut, just hang on. Don't let it get to you. Don't go crazy on me.
Michelle Binns was sent to a women's prison in Lexington, Oklahoma, where at the time she was the only woman on death row.
It's approximately an 8x10 cell, concrete walls, concrete floor. You have a stainless steel toilet, and you have steel beds that are bolted to the walls. It would be like caging an animal in a small crate and leaving them in there. Nothing to do, nothing to do. You can't watch TV, you can't listen to the radio. They will bring you books to read, they'll bring you magazines to read, and that's the extent of it.
They had never had a woman on death row before, so they didn't know how to deal with a woman. They had no rules for women. I mean, we had one room up there by myself, and it was very scary. You're in isolation. Once in a while, they'll bring you books to read if you want to read books. I ended up getting a lot of letters and people writing to me.
One of the people she wrote to regularly was her husband and co-defendant, Steve Binns. Michelle also corresponded with Officer Jack Cottrell.
She was a very people person, and to limit her contact with other people was probably the hardest thing for her to deal with.
Officer Cottrell says that Michelle eventually confided in him what had really happened the night Robert Bush was killed.
Well, she told me that she was driving Steve around, and Steve had been paid to bully a man over a gambling debt, and that when they got to his house, she walked up with Steve to the front door, and she did not know Steve had a sawed-off shotgun, and when the guy came to the door, Steve killed him instead of just threatening him like he was supposed to do.
According to Cottrell, Steve gave a very similar version of what had happened on the 19th of March, 1979.
It was my understanding from Stephen Benz that he was paid $50 to do this. Never seeing those two together and their stories are almost word for word, I would say, yeah, it's probably true.
Was this about a lawsuit? Was this about a patent being stolen? I really don't know. I'm not sure I still have the true story about why Mr. Bush was killed.
For a while, Steve thought it would be better if we got divorced, which we did. He thought it would help me make parole easier if the parole board seen that we weren't associated with each other. And so we didn't have contact for quite a few years. And then we haven't been making parole, so I thought, well, let's just see what happens. And I started writing him again, and we've been writing steadily for about 2 or 3 years now.
I'm still in love with her today. Still, it was when I divorced her. She's got heart. She's a hell of a woman.
He still means quite a bit to me. He'll always mean something to me because we've been together since we've been off and on since we've been 15. He's just, I can't say the exact love of my life, but in a way, yes, he is.
When Women on Death Row continues, Chelsea Richardson's desperate plea.
I know I'm innocent. I'm convicted of something I didn't do.
Prosecutors say greed motivated her to kill.
When you see the crime scene pictures, it's very disconcerting because there are cute little Christmas tree and blood.
And later, an interview with Latasha Pulliam.
I heard Shenosha hollering, calling me.
Her victim was a young child.
This is probably one of the worst murders that comes across a desk of a prosecutor.
When you see the crime scene pictures, it's very disconcerting because there are cute little Christmas tree and blood.
It's so ugly, it's even hard just to describe.
It must have been absolutely, you know, like something out of the worst, most violent Quentin Tarantino movie.
Two weeks before Christmas in 2003, the peaceful, middle-class community of Mansfield, Texas, was rocked by a grotesque double murder. The victims were Rick and Susanna Walmsley.
The mother was shot while lying on a couch. The father's body was found not too far away, sort of near the foyer. He was shot and stabbed, and so was the mother. She was shot and stabbed somewhere between 18 and 21 times.
Initially, Mansfield police had no leads or obvious suspects for the double murder. Rick Walmsley was a successful accountant, and his wife Susanna seemed to be the perfect housewife and mother.
Susanna was one of these women who's still beautiful, you know, into middle age. Just this naturally beautiful redhead. She was a homemaker who always knew exactly the right thing to do. People envied them in a lot of ways, but they had troubled relationships with their children.
Detectives soon focused their attention on Rick and Susanna's son, 19-year-old Andrew. His girlfriend, Chelsea Richardson, and her best friend, Susana Toledano, also became suspects.
I can't speak on anybody else, but I know I'm innocent. I'm convicted of something I didn't do.
Despite her claim of innocence, prosecutors say Chelsea was the driving force behind a cold-blooded plot to murder Andrew's parents.
As a matter of fact, prosecutors really painted Chelsea Richardson as the mastermind of this whole crime, and that she had influenced Andrew Walmsley and her other friends to piece together this plot that they would enter into the house and kill the parents in hopes that Andrew could inherit his family's estate, and that they would all be set up for life. They would buy a house and live together and have all this money.
Chelsea had grown up in a poor household. Her family lived on the rural outskirts of Fort Worth. The Richardsons didn't have much, but they had each other.
We had a close family. If one parent wasn't there, the other one was there, and at night they were usually both there, unless my dad had to travel for work.
But when Chelsea was 15, her beloved father died from a sudden heart attack.
And we called 911, and they didn't answer for 10 minutes. And my mom had me help do CPR on my dad. God, give my dad back. Take me, don't take my dad, you know? But he didn't come back.
When he passed away, it hit all of us really hard.
Chelsea suffered the most.
Especially with her still in high school, it was really difficult for her. It's like she tried to go ahead and focus more on her friends and her school.
Susana Toledano became Chelsea's closest friend.
She and Susanna had gotten close at school and were best buddies, best friends forever, that kind of thing.
Prosecutors say Chelsea was the dominant force in the relationship.
Prosecutors painted Susana Toledano as a shy and awkward girl who really had difficulty entering into many social circles. And Chelsea Richardson as very gregarious, had a bubbly personality, and who was someone who could really carry Susana Toledano into some of those social circles.
When she was 18, Susana, who was having problems at home, moved in with the Richardsons.
It was a little weird having somebody live in the house that wasn't family. It's not necessarily bad, it's just, I guess, strange.
It was Chelsea's older brother, James, who eventually introduced the girls to 19-year-old Andrew Walmsley. Andrew had recently left high school, but was still living at home.
Andrew was one of these kids who wanted to work with his hands. He didn't want to go sit in school and study to be a CPA or to be that kind of boxed in. He loved souping up his car. He had a white Mustang. He wanted to be an auto mechanic, and they had higher expectations for him.
Andrew worked at a miniature golf course and studied at the local junior college at his parents' request. But he would often spend late nights at the IHOP Cafe in nearby Arlington, playing rounds of Yu-Gi-Oh with Chelsea's brother.
It's kind of a game, a lot more involved than chess.
They spent all this time at the IHOP playing Yu-Gi-Oh, this card game, this fantasy card game that you think of little children playing.
One night, Chelsea came along.
She'd go over there, she'd play games, hang out with us. They eventually met, and I don't know, after a time, they just kind of started talking.
You know, I'm sure as soon as she saw him, she just was like, bam, you know, that was it. Like, here's this, you know, kind of cute kid who's got some money and he's hanging out with us, you know?
Andrew had a reputation for being arrogant and brash and just like better than everybody else.
Andrew had an explosive temper.
People didn't like to work for him at the putt-putt golf place where he worked because he was just obnoxious. But with Chelsea and her friends, he really found sort of a niche.
Andrew was attracted to things that weren't where he was from. He liked the working class. He liked the kind of a bit more laid-back atmosphere, and you know, Chelsea really embodied all of that.
Chelsea and Andrew began dating, but when Andrew's parents, Rick and Susanna, finally met her, they didn't approve.
She did not feel welcome there. You know, Chelsea was overweight. She did not present herself necessarily like the cheerleaders and the smart girls at the school where Andrew went. She was not the person they would have chosen for their son to have a serious relationship with.
The young couple even talked about getting married.
This is his first serious relationship, and he's got to make a choice. Is he going to be the big dog in her world or the little whipped pup in his parents' world?
In the autumn of 2003, Andrew dropped out of junior college. The Walmsleys threatened to cut him off financially.
Instead of actually saying, well, okay, I need to do this, 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 and this to get the kind of job that I can support myself with the way I want to, they started just toying with the idea to shoot at the Walmsley's car.
The cruel and deadly idea apparently grew out of Andrew and Chelsea's mounting resentment.
They had met several times at a local IHOP and talked about ways that they could kill Andrew Walmsley's parents so that he could inherit his family's estate, which, according to court records, showed it was valued at somewhere about $1.65 million. And that included their house, which is a very nice house, and also a $1 million life insurance policy.
According to her testimony, Susana Toledano's loyalty prevented her backing out.
It's difficult for anybody to speculate about how an idea like that gets formulated, but you know, it was this perfect storm of Chelsea wants money, she wants a big life. You know, Andrew hates his parents, and they've got Susana Toledano who will do whatever they tell her to do.
Susana didn't have a choice. She didn't have a choice, you know. She had to do what Chelsea said.
She could get not only the son and the money, and she could get revenge too. There's this sense that I got from talking to people that Chelsea all along was this little voice, insistent voice in Andrew Walmsley's ear.
Chelsea Richardson paints a different picture.
I wouldn't necessarily say my life took a wrong direction or I hooked up with the wrong crowd, because people can lie to you. You can be the best friend of somebody and they had this whole double life. That's happened to me.
When Women on Death Row continues, Chelsea Richardson faces execution.
So yeah, I'm afraid to die. I'm not afraid of where I go. I know I'll go with God. He knows. I know. But I'm afraid of dying.
And later,
she had nail marks, she had a black eye. She had tears in her vagina, she had bruises in her vagina. She was just beaten top to bottom and raped.
Inside the mind of a serial child abuser and killer.
I faced death more than once by the hands of my mother and baby.
Prosecutors believe that in 2003, Chelsea Richardson, her boyfriend Andrew Walmsley, and her best friend Susana Toledano devised a plot to murder Andrew's parents. They hoped to cash in on the Walmsleys' life insurance policy and an estate worth $1.6 million. That autumn, they put the plan into action.
So they asked Hilario Cardenas, who was a manager at the IHOP, if he could get them a gun, and he got him a gun. And they, had some rounds of shooting practice. The first plan to kill the Walmsleys, they were going to shoot at the gas tank of the Walmsleys' car because they had seen that in a movie.
It's gonna blow up in a big fireball and it will consume all three of the other Walmsleys, and then they get a check in the mail,
The first attempt took place on the afternoon of the 9th of November 2003, as Rick and Susana Walmsley and Andrew's sister Sarah were visiting a stable.
So Andrew and Susana load up in the car in Andrew's incredibly noticeable white Mustang that his parents bought for him.
Susie Toledano takes a shot at the Walmsley, the parents,
thinking that this was going to make the car blow up, which of course it did not. But they did hit the car. Andrew's mother calls Andrew as soon as the bullets hit the car, within seconds, and says, "Where the fuck are you?" Because she knew something was going on, and they had probably seen that white Mustang.
They had filed a report about somebody shooting at the car and seeing the white Mustang that looked suspiciously like their son's.
My money, what right do you have to do?
After the attempt at shooting the gas tank on the car didn't work, they determined that they were actually going to have to go into the Walmsley's home, and they were going to make it look like a burglary, and they were going to shoot the Walmsleys with this gun that they still had.
The three teenagers spent hours honing their skills at a friend's ranch.
They all went out in the country practicing shooting to see who was the best shot.
Not long after that, they made the attempt that actually ended up working.
On the night of December 11th, 2003, Susanna had already done all of her Christmas decorations perfectly.
Andrew had a key to his parents' house, and so they go in through the garage.
His mother was asleep on the couch.
And when they get to the dining room, Susanna's got the gun.
And Toledano says, Chelsea gave me a little push, and she shoots Miss Walmsley in the head. Then proceeds on to the bedroom and shoots the father, who, though, puts up a terrific struggle.
According to Susanna Toledano, after she shot him, that he was basically down on his knees. And Andrew Walmsley and Chelsea Richardson walked toward Rick Walmsley as he begged for his life and asked them why they were doing this.
At some point, he had to have realized that his own son was killing him. I mean, I think for any parent, that's the ultimate nightmare. There's somebody that has a knife and they start stabbing him, but he still keeps coming. And then he grabs Susanna, grabs her hair and pulls her hair.
Andrew ends up shooting him in the foyer of his own home.
And at this point, Toledano says that Chelsea Richardson told her to go back and finish off Miss Walmsley.
Go out the back door, get in the car, put their clothes in a trash bag.
And then nothing happens. They don't get a call from the police. Nobody discovers them. So Andrew takes it upon himself. They go back in the house and they dial 911. Nobody says anything, they just hang up, but the police show up. And at some point, Andrew and Chelsea drive up. Like, oh, I heard about this on the news. They act the surprised relatives of the crime victims. And for a while, that's all they're considered.
The plan was to shut up and wait for the money. That's what Chelsea told Susanna. Act like nothing happened. Act totally normal.
But Mansfield detectives soon learned of Andrew's difficult relationship with his parents. They obtained a warrant to search his car.
The police were not able to find any specific, DNA evidence or anything in the car. They'd really done a pretty good job of cleaning it out.
More than 3 months later, the detectives finally got a break in the case.
One of the few pieces of physical evidence they had was a clump of hair that Rick, in his fight to stay alive, had grabbed at Susanna and pulled from her hair. And as the police officers who were investigating the case zeroed in, they asked family members for samples of DNA.
Susanna Toledano was arrested on the 5th of April 2003 and charged with murder. Hoping to avoid the death penalty, she decided to tell the police everything.
So she plea bargains out, says, yeah, I'm guilty, and starts spilling this story of these lost, angry kids who convinced her to help them kill the Walmsleys, who told her that they would give her a lot of money.
2 days later, Andrew Walmsley and Chelsea Richardson were arrested and charged with capital murder.
I was at a local restaurant, and next thing I know, there's all these people, and I'm under arrest, and I can't figure out why. It was heartbreaking to be taken to the police station, to be interrogated, and you're like, why am I here? You don't understand. What in the world happened here,
The revelation that Andrew and his girlfriend and her best friend were involved in this murder just sent this town into shock.
During Chelsea's trial, prosecutors relied on Susanna to recreate the horror of what had happened that night.
When you have a young woman on the witness stand admitting her role in killing 2 people, her testimony became very powerful and very strong for the prosecution, even though the prosecutor's case did not have any physical evidence that linked Chelsea Richardson to the crime.
The prosecution painted this scene of Chelsea coaching Susanna in the dining room. You can do it. When they get to the dining room, Susanna's got the gun, and Chelsea, according to her testimony, urged her to go in there and shoot Mrs. Walmsley in the head.
Under Texas law, you don't have to necessarily be the trigger man in a crime, but if you go along with other defendants who are involved in the crime, you're equally as culpable and can be prosecuted the same way as the trigger man.
If you don't have Toledano's testimony, you don't have a case. There'd be no conviction, I'm telling you right now. Zero, zippo.
But the Mansfield police were also able to prove that the gun used to kill the Walmsleys was the same weapon used for target practice at the ranch. In May 2005, 21-year-old Chelsea Richardson was sentenced to death. In exchange for her testimony, Susana Toledano received life in prison.
I think prosecutors were willing to seek the death penalty against Chelsea Richardson because prosecutors felt that she had even talked Andrew Walmsley into killing his parents.
In March 2006, Andrew Walmsley received life in prison. His lawyers claimed he suffered from mental illness and as a result could be easily manipulated.
In Chelsea's case, they were able to show that Chelsea had more of an active role, more of a planning role. She was more persistent than Andrew.
I mean, a lot of things were said that weren't true at my trial, that people lied a lot. It's hell on earth. They're like the cell doors you see on movies, just the bars, but they're painted black and it says death row. We're behind a locked gate where we can't go nowhere. You can't come out your cell unless you're stripped.
Chelsea consoles herself by writing poetry, drawing, and immersing herself in the Bible.
Chelsea believes God's going to bring her through this.
You don't know what tomorrow holds. That just hits you even harder, you know? You think, oh my God, they're executing people and these people ain't even had a chance or nothing. So yeah, I'm afraid to die. I'm not afraid of where I'll go. I know I'll go with God. He knows. I know.
I honestly feel Chelsea is innocent. I do. There is no evidence. And I think there was, I believe with her lawyer, there was a lot of wrong done in her trial.
James Richardson also stands by his sister Chelsea, although they've never spoken about what happened that night.
I know she didn't have nothing to do with this, so I would need to ask her where she was. Asking that would just be just as good as me saying I don't believe you.
It shatters your world. It shatters your family. You're hurting. Your family's hurting. I can't even touch my family, you know? It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Looking over at her every time we go and visit her and knowing that there's still a chance that she could die. To sit there and see her on the other side of the glass. Never really be able to give her a hug again.
I think a lot of times reporters, we think that if we can go back into someone's past and we can put together all the pieces and talk to all the people, that somehow it's going to make sense at the end. I didn't think there was any logic to this. There were so many reasons not to commit this crime. When you try to make sense of the terrible things people do, maybe there isn't any sense to be made from it.
When you look at the autopsy pictures in this case, you realize that this is probably one of the worst murders that comes across a desk of a prosecutor.
You know, I'm not an expert, but as I said earlier, this is probably one of the most gruesome crimes I've ever heard committed against a child by another woman.
13 years have passed since I tried this case. It is still one of the most brutal cases that I have dealt with. One of the cases that, unfortunately, I cannot forget.
In March 1991, 19-year-old Latasha Pulliam was charged with an horrific crime: the kidnap, rape, torture, and murder of 6-year-old Shenosha Richards. The tragedy began in broad daylight on Chicago's South Side.
Shenosha Richards was an adorable little 6-year-old girl who lived on the South Side with her mom and her sister.
That afternoon, Shenosha was playing outside, and unfortunately for her, she had met Latasha in the neighborhood. She had been warned by her mother not to go anywhere with Latasha Pulliam because her mother, Emma Richards, knew that this was really a stranger.
The 19-year-old was a known drug user. She was living in a semi-abandoned apartment with her much older boyfriend, 46-year-old Dwight Jordan.
During that day, I went out on my own by myself to go get high. There was no plans to take anybody off the street and do anything.
Latasha's version of what happened that day differs significantly from the prosecution's account.
Me coming back from the party, I seen Shenosha Richards. She asked me to take care of her. She wasn't a stranger to me. I met her mother through my boyfriend, which my boyfriend and the mother, they were a couple. On that day, she asked me to take care of her because wasn't nobody at home, and I didn't have a problem with it. The family didn't have a problem with it, I didn't have a problem with it. And yes, I was on more drugs than just cocaine at that time. I went in the store, bought a bag of potatoes, and brought her back to my apartment.
The day before that, she had asked her mom, do you know Latasha and her boyfriend? So they, I think, had plans. They lured her there with an offer of some chips and a movie.
Shenosha was convinced by Latasha to go up to the apartment. I think it was a semi-abandoned apartment where Latasha lived with Dwight Jordan.
Shenosha had no idea what was about to happen.
No, I did not know Dwight Jordan was in the apartment. I told her to go inside the bedroom where there was a TV, and she did. I stayed in the kitchen, I was continuing to get high. The reason why I told her to go in the room because I'm not the type of person to get high around children, not even my own.
After about 30 minutes, Latasha says she entered the bedroom.
I heard Shenosha hollering, calling me, and when I came to see what was going on, Dwight Jordan was on top of her. We were actually behind her, on top of her, both actually. And me and him got in a confrontation.
But according to Latasha's own signed statement, rather than stop the attack, she joined in.
Shenosha was sexually assaulted by both Latasha Pulliam and Dwight Jordan, rectally and vaginally, with the end of a hammer and a shoe polish bottle.
For 6-year-old Shenosha, the nightmare was far from over. A block and a half away, Shenosha's mother and sister realized the 6-year-old was missing from the park.
When her older sister goes to look for her to come home, she cannot find her. Her sister comes home, tells her mom sends her some other places to look for her.
Witnesses reported seeing Shenosha walk off hand in hand with Latasha, heading towards the building where Pulliam lived. Shenosha's mother decided to confront the 19-year-old, but not before calling the police.
They go to that location, they talk to them, they both deny seeing her whatsoever. As Emma Richards is leaving, a neighbor says to her, go back in there. There's only one way in and out of this building, and I saw your daughter go up. I have not seen her come out.
I pulled up and met Miss Richards. She told me that her daughter is missing, and she know that the parties that were involved live on the 3rd floor. We went through the whole apartment, checking each and every room to discover, or to look for her daughter.
For Shenosha, it was already too late.
And upon our exit, that's when we discovered the pair of legs hanging from the garbage can. that we thought was a doll. And simultaneously, we both lifted up the lid of the garbage can, and we discovered Shannosha was in the garbage can with her back down, feet hanging out.
She sees her little arm exposed and finds her child thrown in the garbage can like a piece of garbage.
The little girl's body was still warm.
Her skin tone was not of average skin tone. It was debris from her mouth where she had aspirated, apparently, from a result of the extension cord being around her neck. In that case there was no movement of her body at all. My first response was to get her first aid, which resulted in me, like I said, picking her up out of the can and getting her down to the squad car. But I do recall hearing some glass break or something break in the front, and I ran back to the third floor. So when I looked up from the third floor window, I saw Latasha leaving from the first floor. Apparently she jumped from the first floor. And I got on the radio, advised the dispatcher to notify other units outside that I had a female black running from the location.
Latasha is chased by some neighbor boys who see her running, as well as the police, and caught a short distance away.
Both Latasha Pulliam and Dwight Jordan were arrested. 3 days after the murder, the 19-year-old gave a chilling account of what had happened.
After the sexual assault, they had to do something with Shannosha. And I believe Latasha was afraid of what would happen if Shannosha left.
According to Latasha's signed statement, Shannosha pleaded for mercy.
She confessed to the little girl begging for her life, saying, "I won't tell anybody. Please don't kill me. I like what you do to me," as they strangled her and raped her repeatedly.
Now, Dwight Jordan left after the sexual assault, so Latasha was the only person left in the apartment with Shannosha Richards, and that's when, in effect, she was murdered in 3 different ways.
Latasha confessed to putting an extension cord around Shannosha's neck.
I did not know it was going to happen. I did not know. And I know in the transcripts it says this, it says that. You know, in a lot of people's cases it says this and says that. But the honest truth is, it was never planned.
And she took her to another room or another apartment and set something on fire to terrorize her even more. So she was very methodical. She was definitely getting some secondary gain out of torturing this child.
She was strangled. She suffered 2 puncture wounds to the chest with that was consistent with a nail that was in a board that was found in the apartment. One of those wounds went into the heart. And then she was hit and beaten about the head with either the hammer or the 2x4, and she was stuffed naked in a garbage can in the apartment.
In fact, the medical examiner's report revealed 42 different injuries on Shannosha's body. Her death remains one of the most gruesome child murders in Chicago history. But the story attracted little media coverage.
It wasn't a big story because she was black and the kid was black. Because she was a poor black girl in Chicago. She lived on the south side of Chicago. But if it happened on the North Shore, I can assure you, it would have been a front page story. Latasha Pulliam did not make the front page. She probably made 5 paragraphs.
Nor did the case make front-page news when Cook County prosecutors announced that for 19-year-old Latasha Pulliam, they would seek the maximum penalty, death.
I think it was one of the most heinous crimes I've ever covered against a child, especially about a woman again. Most cases involve sexual assault, sexual abuse, but rarely do they involve a woman killing a child and sexually attacking her.
This was not for Dwight. This was for Latasha. Latasha was the one who used the hammer not only to sexually assault her with the handle of the hammer, but used that same hammer to crush her skull, Latasha is the one who strangled her with the electrical cord. Latasha is the one who put the board with the nails into it, into her chest and into her heart.
If convicted, Latasha Pulliam would become one of only 7 women sentenced to death in the state of Illinois. When Women on Death Row continues, the discovery of another tiny victim.
She had bruises to her head, she had nail marks, she had a black eye, she had tears in her vagina, she had bruises in her vagina. She was just beaten top to bottom and raped.
And what may have caused Latasha Pulliam to commit such terrible crimes.
I faced death more than once, by the hands of my mother mainly.
There are so many, mirrored images here of her own abuse and neglect.
In June 1994, 3 years after the crime occurred, Latasha Pulliam and her co-defendant, Dwight Jordan, went on trial for the kidnap, sexual assault, torture, and brutal murder of 6-year-old Shenosha Richards. 23-year-old Pulliam was labeled by the prosecution as a sexual sadist.
The prosecution portrayed her, I believe they referred to her as having the devil within her. They portrayed her as being subhuman, as being a monster, as being someone whose whole character was to prey on young children.
The jury also heard that Shenosha Richards was not Pulliam's first victim. Pulliam had first come to the attention of medical staff at a Chicago hospital in 1985, when she gave birth to a baby girl.
I was 14 years old when I became pregnant. When I didn't know I was pregnant, the baby's father suggested I go see the doctor, even though I was taking protection at the time, the foam, but it didn't work. I got pregnant.
Several days later, the young mother checked out of the hospital, leaving the infant behind. The baby was later placed in the care of relatives. But by age 17, Latasha Pulliam was pregnant again.
I got around some older people who had children. They was telling me that, drugs wouldn't harm their baby, wouldn't harm my baby because, look at their child was fine. And I started doing drugs.
She had a little baby girl that was born prematurely at Stroger Hospital. The baby was drug exposed and spent, I think, about 3 to 4 months in the neonatal intensive care unit.
The baby suffered from cerebral palsy and a number of other medical problems.
She was hooked up to oxygen, tubes, everything. I felt like I wasn't responsible enough, and no child should have to go through that.
Latasha convinced doctors that she was finally ready to be a mother.
To the best of my recollection, Latasha did complete a drug treatment program, and the baby went home with her, and then unfortunately was readmitted about a little bit less than 2 months later.
Her daughter was 5 months old, and she was admitted to the burn unit with a round, second-degree classic immersion burn to her buttocks. It was not an accidental burn, it was an intentional immersion burn.
I was bathing her, and the water did not feel hot to me. And I put her in the bathtub, not the bath, correction, face bowl. And she wasn't crying or screaming or anything. But later to kind of find out she had these blisters on her behind.
She appeared to be remorseful. She managed to convince them that she really didn't know how hot the water was, so Latasha did take her baby home again. She was then lost to follow-up right around a year later that the neonatologist got a phone call.
And she was admitted beaten and raped. She had bruises to her head, she had nail marks, she had a black eye. She had tears in her vagina, she had bruises in her vagina. She was just beaten top to bottom and raped.
She displayed some significant sadistic behaviors that would indicate that that this was a compulsion. This was something that she was not going to be able to control herself to keep from doing. Although she certainly did know right from wrong, and she certainly knew how to cover her tracks. Latasha Pulliam should have been locked up at the time that she burned her baby. That was intentional, that was premeditated. And had she been locked up, had the system not failed in that respect, Shenosha would probably still be alive. And then in March of 1991, the first thing that I heard was on the news about a little 6-year-old girl being found murdered in a garbage can or dumpster, and that Latasha Pulliam had been arrested for the murder.
We saved her daughter's life, but that didn't keep her from killing some other child.
During Latasha Pulliam's trial, the prosecution argued that her history as a child abuser was all the more reason for the jury to recommend the maximum sentence in the state of Illinois, death. But first, the defense presented evidence that Latasha herself had endured terrible abuse as a child.
As I learned more about her, it became more understandable, because she had been a victim of abuse herself, and abusers tend to become abusers.
The defense did what it could with what they had. They presented a theory that her mother began to physically abuse her when she was 5 years old.
My mother was the main abuser, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I faced death more than once, by the hands of my mother mainly. I was drowned by the hands of my mother in hot scalding water. At 3 that I can remember, I was being beat with the straightened hair comb, burnt, things like that.
But what the jury didn't hear was evidence that Latasha Pulliam was not only physically, but sexually abused from when she was just a baby.
Well, the Michael Reese Hospital records, which at age 22 months, noted that she has genital scarring.
Along with defense lawyer Anna Arenheim, Mary Lynn Kaplan, a licensed social worker, spent a year and a half digging up records for Latasha Pulliam's appeal.
She was just abused on a daily basis, physically and sexually.
5 years old, my first sex was my mother. 5 years old. I was scared of my mom. You know, my mom at the time was like 300-something pounds, and I was just a small, petite child.
You know, as she got older, she was prostituted by her mother. She was sexually abused by her uncles. Every adult in her life basically abused her or severely neglected her.
School records revealed disturbing behavior in and out of the classroom. Still, no one intervened.
The principal found her in the parking lot with another young boy having sexual relations and 3 other boys standing in line to then take their turn. So despite all this overt, sexual behavior, no one really went a step further and reported it to the authorities.
I think of Latasha as the ultimate victim. She was victimized in the most horrendous ways. I mean, her memories from her childhood, I can't even imagine what they are if she has any.
At age 13, the authorities finally took notice.
They uncovered the fact that she had gotten herpes, apparently from a rape by her mother's boyfriend when she was an adolescent. She was hospitalized for that, and that's when some real serious intervention began.
Latasha spent months in a psychiatric hospital and was later placed in foster care. But it was apparently too late for the teenager, who ran away repeatedly. According to the prosecution, Pulliam also participated in the rape of another girl.
Where the 2 of them left the group home without permission when they were teenagers, tried to get away. She eventually, for $20, agreed to hold down this other girl while a man raped her. There's nothing that she can say that will convince me that she didn't know exactly what she was doing to Shenosha. This was a pattern with her.
There are so many, mirrored images here of her own abuse and neglect. It's not about, what you want or who you want to be. It's who you have become.
The things that I find chilling as a defense lawyer is that she told the police officers, according to this statement, that Shenosha said to her, "Please don't hurt me, I love you." LaTosha might have been fantasizing that Shenosha really loved her.
In 2003, after an unsuccessful appeal, Governor George Ryan granted clemency to 167 people on death row in Illinois. LaTosha Pulliam is currently serving a life sentence in prison.
Well, since the death sentence has been vacated and since her sentence has been commuted to life, she needs to spend the rest of her life in jail. That's a sentence that she deserves.
16 years after the murder of Shenosha Richards, LaTosha Pulliam now claims that it was her boyfriend, Dwight Jordan, who committed the murder.
This child was bludgeoned, punctured, and strangled, and raped. Okay, and my responsibility is that I should never brought her to an apartment. Regardless, they find that I did not do the murder, did not rape this child, etc., that pain will still be on the inside of me, because this child is gone.
I would hope, though, that she would give some sort of respect to Shenosha's memory and stop saying, "This isn't my fault, I was a victim." Own up to what you did. Finally say, "You know what, I did this." Even if you don't say it to the public, say it to yourself.
Right now, I'm focusing on that I have peace within myself, and I know God has forgiven me because only He knows what happened.
They've been convicted of terrible crimes.
I don't know, I just kept trying to tell myself, maybe he wasn't dead.
And are among the more than 150 women sentenced to death in the United States.
When the verdict came down and they said guilty, all I wanted to do was just collapse and cry.
In compelling interviews, these women reveal what it's like to face execution.
You don't know what tomorrow holds. That just hits you even harder, You think, oh my God, they're executing people, these people ain't even had a chance or nothing.
And deal with the consequences of their deeds.
Well, I told my attorney, they can kill me then, right then and there. Bring the mama in, let her shoot me. And I meant that.
I've never wanted to die.
I lost everything I ever cared about. Everything.
Almost like every day is your last.
I want to stay alive for me. Because if I'm going to die in here, I'm going to die for my truth.
It was a cold, calculated plot from the get-go to kill this man, and it was done solely for the gain of Donna Cox.
No, I never fell out of love with Jerry.
I felt like she was a victim of circumstances, that she had been involved in this because she had associated with the wrong people.
In October 1987, 28-year-old Donna Cox was sentenced to death in North Carolina for the brutal murder of her boyfriend, Jerry Richardson. After more than 2 decades behind bars, Donna still maintains that she did not kill the man she says she loved.
I don't know, I just kept trying to tell myself, maybe it just wasn't so, maybe it wasn't him, maybe he wasn't dead.
This was Donna's reaction when the police found Richardson's body floating in the Cape Fear River in North Carolina on the 13th of July, 1986. For the first time since her imprisonment, Donna is telling her story.
I did this interview because I was hoping that, you know, maybe it could help somebody. You know, with the younger kids and stuff, that drugs is not the way, okay? And just never, you know, get involved with a married man, you know, because, you know, look what happened.
Donna had a fairly happy, normal childhood in suburban Atlanta.
A very sweet child. She sang, she danced, and she could do all the latest dance steps and so many songs that she knew by heart.
But her parents' relationship was troubled.
With both of my parents, neither one of them hardly ever talked much. You know, they wouldn't talk. You never heard "I love you," and you know, I mean, I miss that.
Donna's mother, Bonnie, remarried twice and went on to have 3 more children.
It may have made her feel like I didn't care as much as I had before. I can see that. But she was special to me.
By the time she reached high school, Donna was looking for a way out. At 16, she attempted suicide by overdosing on non-prescription painkillers. Not long afterwards, she began seeing a man named Joe.
I quit high school in the 10th grade. I eloped and got married. I mean, I didn't even love the man. I just wanted to get away and just be on my own, is really why I did it.
At age 19, Donna gave birth to a daughter, Susie, but she'd married the wrong man.
He would pull her hair out, I mean, in big pieces. And he just whipped her like a man.
Donna eventually left Joe and moved on to another dysfunctional relationship.
Scott introduced me to cocaine, Quaaludes. I about killed myself in that year, and that's why I had to get away from him.
At age 22, Donna decided to make a fresh start. She moved to the quiet rural area of Robeson County, North Carolina. It was here she met Jerry Richardson, a well-known used car dealer.
I just asked him, I said, I really need a job, and, you know, is there anything, you know, that I could do?
People trusted him. People would come from all over this part, the eastern part of the state to have him buy cars wholesale for them, make a few bucks on it. And so he had a lot of friends.
He worked real hard, you know, taught me how to work hard, and he was always good to me. You know, we had a good relationship.
The married father of 2 soon fell for Donna Cox.
He was a very attractive man, and he was real nice, you know, he was sweet.
What she said to me was that they were in love and that nobody had ever treated her with kindness and someone that truly cared about her.
Richardson showered Donna with generous gifts, including a wooden house in Parkton, North Carolina, and a white Lincoln car. He paid for her daughter's private education and took them on trips to the beach.
He made her feel special. He paid all of her bills. He bought all her clothes. He took her out to eat. He showed her a lifestyle that otherwise she would not have known.
But according to Donna, the comfortable lifestyle came at a price. She claims that when Richardson got drunk, he became abusive. It's an allegation his daughter denies.
He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. I never in my life have heard him say a curse word. Never.
We would get in fights, and he, you know, would beat on me.
When she told me that she thought her ribs were broke, I told her, I said, get in your car right now and leave there.
And I loved him. You know, I always went back.
Despite the alleged abuse, Donna spent 4 years living as Richardson's mistress. Court records state she fell pregnant, but lost the baby after 4 months. Donna was once again looking for an escape route.
Jerry would not allow her to go anywhere and do hardly anything. He wanted her to stay at home and tend to her daughter and be there at his beck and call.
Well, you've seen people walk around with the tattoo on their arm that says, born to raise hell. She needs one of those. She just can't stay out of trouble.
Enter James Willis, a local teenager who liked fast cars, drugs, and sex.
I believe that Donna was attracted to the wild side of James Willis. He gave her some type of a thrilling adventure because of his ways and his personality.
Each night, after Richardson had left, Willis and his friends, Roy Grooms and Tony Owens, would throw wild parties at Donna's place.
I would smoke marijuana, and I was doing cocaine with them.
Donna's budding party scene was soon joined by Tracy Phillips. The 16-year-old had recently given birth to Donna's brother's child.